Hi, good morning. My name is Dean Bonner, and I am the Associate Survey Director and Senior Fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome to today's virtual program featuring findings of our latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians and education. The survey is supported with funding from the R.J. and Francis F. Miller Foundation, the Stewart Foundation, and the Wendy Hill Fund. And today's event is supported with funding from the PPIC Corporate Circle and the PPIC Donor Circle. We'd like to thank them all for their support. For today's program, my colleague Deja Thomas will walk through some of the findings for the survey today, and then we'll discuss a few key takeaways and answer questions from the audience. If you have a question, please send it along with your name and organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. As a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. And now I'd like to welcome my colleague, survey analyst Deja Thomas.
Thanks so much, Dean. And thank you all for joining us today and for your interest in this work. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, I would like to start by acknowledging my co-authors on this survey report, which includes Dean, as well as Survey Director Mark Baldessari and Survey Analyst Lauren Mora. And I would also like to acknowledge our funders for this survey, the R.J. and Francis F. Miller Foundation, the Stewart Foundation, and the Wendy Hill Fund. Without their generous support, this work would not be possible. This survey is part of our Californians and Education series, which is now in its 19th year. We didn't have an education-specific survey last year, so it is great to be back. The survey has covered numerous local, state, and national issues related to education since 2004. And for those of you who might be joining us for the first time or might be unfamiliar with the PPIC statewide survey, its mission is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions, which we hope will then be used to help inform and improve state policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. The PPIC survey covers public perceptions, attitudes, and policy preferences, in this instance, all related to K-12 education in the state. And since the start of the survey, PPIC has provided a voice for more than 400,000 Californians on over 200 general, issue-specific, and regional surveys. This particular survey was conducted online from March 9th through the 25th using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel. Interviews were conducted in either English or Spanish according to respondent preferences. Our sample includes about 1,600 adults, and of that total sample, we've identified 1,089 respondents as likely voters. The margin of error is 3.3 for adults and 3.9 for likely voters. For this survey, our sample also includes 338 parents, 269 parents of school-aged children, and 252 public school parents. Okay. Thinking about the direction of the K-12 public education system overall in the state, Californians are pretty divided, with about half saying it's going in the right direction and half saying it's going in the wrong direction. The share saying things are going in the right direction has declined from the majority who said this in our last education survey in 2022. Nearly 7 in 10 Democrats say right direction, while about 8 in 10 Republicans and a majority of independents say it is going in the wrong direction. Looking at the share who say right direction across demographic groups, slim majorities are only reached among Asian Americans, Latinos, younger adults ages 18 to 34, and adults with incomes of 40,000 to under 80,000, and half or fewer across the state's regions say this. About half of adults and 6 in 10 public school parents approve of Governor Newsom's handling of the public school education system, and overall approval has declined from the majority who said this in 2022. About half or fewer and a majority of public school parents approve of the way the state legislature is handling the education system. And like Newsom's approval rating, the share has fallen from the majority who said this in 2022. This time we were also able to ask about the state superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurmond, finding that about half of adults and a majority of public school parents approve. And among partisan groups, approval ratings are similar across these three questions, with most Democrats approving, while most Republicans and half or more independents disapprove. When it comes to preparing students for college, most adults and public school parents say local public schools are doing a good or excellent job, and the share saying this has been similar in recent years. And today, about half of Republicans, as well as majorities of independents and Democrats, say this. Majorities across demographic and regional groups say this, with exceptions of fewer than half among African Americans. And a slim majority of adults and nearly 2 in 3 public school parents say their local schools are doing a good or excellent job preparing students for jobs and the workforce. This share has also been somewhat similar in recent years, and among parties today, majorities of Democrats say they're doing at least a good job compared to about 4 in 10 Republicans and independents. And about half or more among demographic and regional groups say this. This survey also asked about learning loss in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. Most adults overall and parents of school-aged children say that the kids in their community fell behind, and about 7 in 10 or more across demographic groups say this. We also saw 3/4 or more across the state's regions say kids in their communities fell behind. We also asked parents of school-aged children about their own kids, finding that they're far less likely to say that their own child fell behind than they are to say children in their community fell behind, with about half saying this. And in this subgroup, mothers are more likely than fathers, and parents without college degrees are more likely than college graduates to say this. Asked about the biggest pandemic-related challenge for public school students in their communities, over 4 in 10 adults and public school parents say that it is catching up academically. About 1/3 of adults and public school parents say that it is dealing with social emotional impacts. And about 2 in 10 of both groups say it is readjusting to school schedules and routines. Democrats are about equally as likely to say it is catching up academically as they are to say it's dealing with social emotional impacts, while 6 in 10 Republicans and over 4 in 10 independents say that the biggest challenge is catching up academically. There is an interesting pattern across age groups here, with the share saying it's catching up. The biggest challenge is catching up academically, increasing as age increases, and the share saying it's dealing with social emotional impacts, increasing as age decreases. Majorities of public school parents and adults are very or somewhat concerned about mental health and well-being of students in their local schools, the threat of a mass shooting in their local schools, students and families experiencing homelessness, and chronic absenteeism, which is defined by the State Department of Education as a student who is absent for 10% or more school days. And for all of these questions, majorities among demographic and regional groups are concerned. Looking at the share who are very concerned among racial ethnic groups, African Americans are more likely than other groups to say this about all four of these issues, with the only exception being among Latinos when it comes to concern about mass shootings in schools. Californians are divided when it comes to how teachers should be allowed to teach, with about half of adults and public school parents saying there should be state laws setting rules on what teachers can and cannot teach, and half saying public school teachers should be permitted to teach their subjects as they think best. Partisans are divided on this issue. with a majority of Democrats saying public school teachers should teach as they think best, and a solid majority of Republicans saying state laws are needed, while independents are more divided. Overwhelming majorities of adults and public school parents say they support teaching about the history of slavery, racism, and segregation in public schools, and there is strong support among partisans. When it comes to individual school boards creating policies to restrict what subjects teachers and students can discuss in the classroom, majorities of adults and public school parents oppose, with majorities of Democrats and independents opposing, while majorities of Republicans express support. And majorities of adults and public school parents also oppose individual school boards passing laws to ban certain books from classrooms and school libraries. And for this issue, majorities of partisans oppose. Half or fewer adults support allowing books in public schools with stories of transgender youth, allowing public schools to include lessons on transgender issues, and allowing public schools to accommodate student requests to go by their chosen pronouns. Among public school parents, support only reaches half when it comes to pronoun accommodations. And for all three of these issues, most Democrats support and most Republicans oppose. About half of independents support allowing books with stories of transgender youth, while majorities of independents oppose on other issues. When it comes to the current level of funding for local public schools, 51% say it's just enough or more than enough. Over 4 in 10 adults and a majority of public school parents say it is not enough. The overall share saying funding is not enough has actually been declining since 2018, with some fluctuation. Today, majorities of Democrats say it's not enough, while Republicans and independents are more likely to say it is sufficient. And shares vary across demographic and regional groups, and among racial ethnic groups. A majority of African Americans say it is not enough compared to fewer among other Californians. Majorities of adults, likely voters, and public school parents say they would vote yes if the state ballot had a bond measure to pay for school construction projects. Similar shares say they'd vote yes if their local school district had a bond measure on the ballot to pay for school construction projects. However, support falls to half among likely voters. General support is lower when it comes to a local ballot measure to increase local parcel taxes, to provide more funds for local public schools, with about 4 in 10 adults and likely voters who say they'd vote yes, compared to a majority of public school parents who say this. As the state continues to implement free preschool for all 4-year-olds, roughly 2 in 3 adults and over 3 in 4 public school parents say the state government should fund voluntary preschool programs such as transitional kindergarten for all 4-year-olds in California. Solid majorities have held this view since we asked this question in 2014. And today, 8 in 10 Democrats and about 6 in 10 independents say the state should do this, while a majority of Republicans say the state should not. Majorities across demographic groups say the state should fund voluntary preschool, and this share declines with rising age. Across the state's regions, 6 in 10 or more say the state should do this. Our survey covered other topics as well, and some of them are listed here. I would encourage you all to take a look at the survey report, crosstabs, and time trends available on our website. Also, our survey director, Mark Baldessari, has published a blog alongside the report that covers the election questions that we asked this month, since they were not in the report, but there's also the possibility that we might have other blogs on the way. Okay, that concludes the presentation, but I would like to remind everyone in the audience to please submit your questions at ppiceventquestions@gmail.com, and please include your name and the name of your organization that you are with. With that, I'd like to welcome Dean back for the key takeaways.
Hi, thanks, Deja. That was really great. And yes, there's so much information in this survey. We don't even cover the election stuff, which is super interesting in the actual report. And so there's that, and there's, just a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I'm going to, use my time here to talk a little bit about English language learners and some of the perceptions that Californians have on this group. So according to the most recent California Department of Education data, 1 in 5 California public school students are considered English language learners, and that totals about 1.1 million students. And so this is a large group, and so this is the group that we should be interested in kind of figuring out where they fall when it comes to progress and Californians' views on them. And so we ask a general question that just asks people how much they've heard about students who are English language learners. And notably, just 1 in 5 have heard a lot, about half have heard a little, and 1 in 3 say they have heard nothing at all. And so the fact that, you have a large segment of the California population that hasn't heard a lot about this group, but yet they make up 1 in 5 students, seems notable to me. However, it is interesting that, despite not a great deal of knowledge, 2 in 3 Californians say they're concerned about improving the student outcomes for English language learners, and about half say that this should be a very high or a high priority, with another 4 in 10 saying it should be a medium priority. And so there is the recognition, at least, that this is something that California should be focusing on. And when we ask about providing extra assistance in an effort to try and improve the academic performance of English language learners, even if it means they receive more assistance than other students, we find that 2 in 3 Californians think that 2 in 3 Californians are in favor of this. So that's one way to look at kind of their perceptions. However, while 2 in 3 are actually concerned and want to provide extra assistance to this group of students, just half think that school districts that have more English language learners should get more funding from the state. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And so I was curious, Deja, did that disconnect strike you when we were working through the report?
Yeah, for sure. I remember looking at those questions and being a little bit confused about that as well. It kind of reminds me actually of this is sort of related, but I was also looking at the kindergarten readiness questions we asked in this month's survey. And we asked this about English language learning students and also about lower income students. And overall, about 6 in 10 adults and public school parents say they're very or somewhat concerned about the fact or that students who speak English as a second language are less likely than other children to be ready for kindergarten. And this includes nearly 2 in 10 of both groups who are very concerned. So that disconnect was surprising to me because it seems like people are thinking about that even before they start school.
Yeah.
Yep. I will say though that I did notice that overall the share who are concerned about English language learners' kindergarten readiness is lower than the share of Californians saying that they're concerned about lower income students being ready for kindergarten. So I wonder if maybe that has something to do with it.
That's a great segue because, I was digging into where's the disconnect here? And so we also asked questions about kind of the resources that are provided to both English language learners and lower income students. And their belief that English language learners don't need additional funding could be linked to the fact that, 6 in 10 Californians think that the current level of resources for English language learners in their local public schools is more than enough or just enough, while 1 in 3 say not enough. While on the same question about lower income students, we find that Californians are much more likely to say the current level of resources for lower income students is not enough. And so it could be this perception that at least we see here that in these two cases that the perceptions towards English language learners are slightly different than the lower income students. But it is notable that we're discussing these two groups, of course, because back in 2013, California enacted the local control funding formula. So this has been enacted since 2013, passed in 2012, and this provides additional funding to schools who have more English language learners and lower income students, and gives the local school districts more flexibility over how the state's funding is spent. But what's notable is that even though it's been around for more than a decade, and it was probably discussed back in 2011 even, this kind of concept, we find that just about 1 in 5 say they've heard a lot or little, with just 3% saying that they've heard a lot about this program. And the findings among public school parents are not that different. However, when kind of given that description I just read, 2 in 3 Californians and parents actually favor this idea. And so while they may not want to provide the extra funding specifically for English language learners, it is notable that they do feel that this kind of this funding protocol, the LCFF, it is something that they're in favor of. And 7 in 10 actually think that giving this extra funding will actually improve the outcomes of English language learners and lower income students. So I found that noteworthy that despite not having a lot of knowledge there. It is notable though, because as part of the LCFF, there are local accountability plans. I think the acronym there is LCAPs. And this is something that public school parents are supposed to be offered or be given the opportunity to provide to provide input on this. However, when asked, just 1 in 3 public school parents say that this is something that they've been asked to do. So overall, while there is this kind of interest in providing this additional information that the state, this is in the kind of part of the law, it seems like for most public school parents, they aren't really being kind of included here. And this is a finding, kind of all of these findings are ones that we found over the last few years, whether it be they've heard hardly nothing at all, or that they favor this. So there's a lot of support for the program, but it seems like potentially, especially when it comes to the LCAPs, public school parents don't at least feel in our surveys that they're being asked to provide this information or being included in these discussions. And these discussions are important because they're about how the money at the local districts is going to be spent in local schools. And so having the parents involved in those discussions are especially important. And so I know we could talk about this for a long time, but I do want to mention once again that you have the opportunity to submit questions, and you can do that at ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And I think earlier we actually already have a question that someone has sent in, and I would encourage you, when you do send questions, if you could provide kind of your name and what organization you're from, that would be great. So this question asks, it was interesting to see that compared to parents' perceptions of their own children, all adults are far more likely to say that students had fallen behind academically during the pandemic. What do you make of this sizable difference in perception? It's a slide that you covered earlier. It's just a very stark difference.
Yep, I can take this one. So yeah, this is about 2 separate survey questions. One where we asked Californians about children in their communities, and another where we asked parents of school-aged children about their own kids. And yeah, overall, 8 in 10 adults said kids in their community fell behind during the pandemic. And if you look at parents of school-age children and also public school parents for this question, the shares saying that kids in their communities fell behind are similar to the overall findings. But going back to the question, it's true that parents of school-age children and even public school parents are far less likely to say that their own child fell behind, with about half of each saying this in our survey. And when I think about questions like these, I think about social desirability. Maybe it's my psychology degree, I don't know. But this question asks parents about their own children, which is already something a bit more personal. And then we're asking them if their child fell behind academically, and that might not be something that everyone wants to admit, even if it is true. I'm not saying it's always true, but yeah. And not education related, we had a question that was about water conservation in an old July environment survey, and I think I was the one who presented that as well. And I remember the question were, one, if people thought other people in their communities were conserving enough water, and two, if they thought they themselves were conserving enough water. And I didn't have time to like look for the slides for this old presentation, but I'm pretty sure the gist is that most were saying that they were conserving enough, but also said other people needed to do more. So again, I think there is an element of social desirability bias here, and maybe just, how you perceive yourself versus the outside world sort of thing happening here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, we know that social desirability exists even on online surveys where it's more disconnected than a telephone interviewer asking you, and you kind of, there's definitely higher, but it still exists. And so, yes. So we have another question. Your survey finds that when it comes to K-12 education, approval for Governor Newsom has declined. Do your findings shed any light on what might be causing this trend? I kind of was looking into this for a blog that was comparing, that potentially would compare like his overall findings to the K-12 findings. And so I can take this one. And what's noteworthy is that I can't necessarily link his lower approval to anything specific. Like Californians are in favor of the preschool funding, which you discussed, which is a big part of what he's put forward in education. There's been other things that Californians have supported, but I did notice that kind of the decline from April 2022 to April 2024 was very similar to the decline we saw in February for his overall approval ratings compared to February 2022. And so it's noteworthy in both cases, I think, that some of the bigger declines are among groups that are generally supportive of the governor. Specifically, there were on education this month, we saw double-digit declines among residents of LA County, African Americans, Latinos, parents, and those with only a high school degree. And then the other element that I thought was noteworthy is that the declines among Democrats, Republicans, and independents are basically identical, with about 8 or 7 points in each case. And so that to me is noteworthy. That's not necessarily a partisan issue that's driving this, but it does seem like some of these groups that have traditionally been more supportive, we've actually seen these declines in his approval rating, specifically on K-12. And so we'll move forward. Your survey has been tracking views of the COVID pandemic and its impact on K-12 for the past 4 years is the next question. And it says, do your findings over this time point to any notable trends or changes in how parents or others have perceived the pandemic's impact on education? I think on this, what we've kind of seen is that the trend, whether it be that we're asking during kind of real time when during like 2021, 2022, or today, is that, Californians in general feel like, there's catching up to do, that there's kids that have fallen behind, that most importantly, kind of what needs to happen is that they need to catch up academically first, and then kind of social emotionally is kind of another element there. And so I think overall, the trends that we're seeing today are similar to what we've seen in the past. But Deja, I'm not sure if you might have anything to add there.
Sorry, I was disconnected for a second. I
That's quite all right.
fully believe you covered that excellently.
Yeah. Yeah. And so another question that we have here are your presentation notes that teacher shortages are one of the issues that this survey looked at. Do you have any findings that point to any regional differences in terms of views of teacher supply? I can go ahead and take this, unless since I took the last one, you can take this one. It's up to you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so it's basically, do your findings point to any regional differences in terms of views of teacher supply?
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, I can take that one. I wasn't able to include those questions and other teacher-related questions in the presentation, so I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. 9 in 10 or more adults and public school parents across the state say that teacher shortages are at least somewhat of a problem, including half who say it's a big problem. So yes, this is still an issue in our state and most likely nationwide. And while about 9 in 10 or more across regions say it's at least somewhat of a problem, there are some differences if you look at the share who say it's a big problem. Majorities of residents in the Inland Empire and San Francisco Bay Area say this, compared to about half in the Central Valley and Los Angeles, as well as Orange, San Diego. So there were a little bit of differences, but again, like overall, most across regions are saying that this is a problem.
Yeah, I found the differences in big problem, like in the share saying that it's a big problem, kind of interesting because, here in San Francisco, there's been a lot of issues with being able to retain and keep teachers. There was recently a affordable housing plan that was going to be available for teachers that I believe recently opened. And so that is kind of something I'm very familiar with. The Inland Empire findings, I'll have to dig into that a little bit. I know that in general, there have been issues when it comes to like having enough doctors in that region and other things. So maybe it's kind of connected to those issues. But to me, it's hugely important because the teachers that we do have, they're asked to do so much, and so we need more of them. And I know your mom's a teacher, my sister's a teacher, and so this is something that I think is really close to home for both of us. So
Right.
yeah. Let's see. It looks like we have another question. Was there anything that surprised you about the findings in this survey? This person must be a journalist because that's a great journalist question that I often have to prepare for because I know it's always coming. So.
Yep. Yep. Same. I can answer first. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I was genuinely surprised. And this, I feel like this doesn't happen often. I'm not generally surprised about a lot of what we find in our surveys. But I was genuinely surprised about the division among Californians and views among public school parents about the LGBTQ or transgender issues in school questions. Um, but when I think a little bit more about it, I know there's a lot of politics surrounding this topic in education, though, as we've seen in other questions in the survey on several accounts, and I outlined some of them in my presentation, the political division on education issues is quite strong overall. I'll also add that we did compare our findings for these questions in the report to a national YouGov poll conducted in January, and those support for allowing public schools to have books on transgender youth, allowing lessons on transgender issues, and allowing pronoun accommodations is at roughly half among Californians, which is that was what was surprising to me. It's still a fact that they're more likely than adults nationwide to say they support these, which that does not surprise me as much, but yeah.
Yeah, those are some great questions and really timely given the politics of it all is really, if you look at the stark partisan divide there, it's really driving a lot of what's happening. And so that's great. I'll add that what really surprised me, I mean, I guess maybe it shouldn't because I don't know if the findings are necessarily different this year. Maybe I just didn't connect the dots in years past. But, we have a couple of questions that we ask, one only of parents and one of kind of everyone. And specifically, the disconnect between when asked, do you think obtaining a college degree or obtaining knowledge or skills needed to do a specific job is more important? And what's noteworthy is that 2 in 3 Californians say that obtaining knowledge or skills needed to do a specific job is more important. And this includes about 2 in 3 parents, public school parents as well. And so to me, that is kind of at odds with the question we ask only of parents, which is what their educational aspirations for their child is, where we find that 2 in 3 say that they want their child to have a bachelor's or higher, with about 4 in 10 saying a graduate degree. And so when given the choice, they have this interesting kind of preference for obtaining knowledge and skills. But then when asked specifically of parents, they want their kids to go to college and potentially obtain a BA or a graduate degree. So that was kind of a little surprising to me. I know it's 2 totally separate questions, but it is to me kind of noteworthy, the kind of disconnect that was there. So, and we have another question real quick. We'll fit this one in for sure, from a viewer in San Rafael. What do you make of the partisan differences in this survey? One would think that education is a place where we could see more common ground. Yeah, I mean, that's something that is always surprising when it comes to this survey, because even on issues that aren't as political as like teaching about the legacy of slavery or including transgender stories or whatnot, which are kind of more loaded politically, even on funding or kind of how they rate their schools or whether or not the direction of schools, we see just partisanship just coming through on so much of this. And I think from my perception, a lot of it is just that it seems, I've been doing this survey, for now, this is, almost, 18 years of this survey that I've done. And I feel like the partisan divide has become a little bit greater, but that may just be reflective of today's hyper partisan environment, regardless of what it is, right. Whether it's what hamburger place you eat at or how you feel on transgender youth or how you feel about, providing more funding for certain groups. I just feel like everything is about kind of politics and party today. So I guess it's not that surprising, but it is something that I do wish that we could find more common ground, because education is hugely important for the state and the economic well-being and future economy of the state.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Nope, I completely agree. I kind of wonder if it's because, education is about pretty much raising and molding children to become adults. And especially with the political division we're seeing now, everyone wants their kids to be molded a certain way. But no, I completely agree with what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sadly, we've reached the end of our program. I would like to thank Deja for your great presentation and discussion here. I would also like to thank again our funders, the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation, Stewart Foundation, and Wendy Hill Fund, as well as the PPIC Corporate and Donor Circle. And of course, thank you all for joining us today. We would appreciate you taking a moment to give us your feedback on this event. You can scan the QR code on the screen to complete the short survey that we have here. And once again, thank you all very much, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.